Everyone thinks the people who left were cowards. They weren't. The truth is simpler and far worse. The lodge only let some of us leave.
Welcome to Horror Audiobook.
I am the only one who made it out of that mountain lodge alive. Not because I was stronger, smarter, or braver, but because I broke the rules when everyone else followed them. This is not a story about ghosts or monsters in the dark. It's about what happens when reality itself turns against you, when obedience becomes a death sentence, and when survival is no longer random. If you're listening to this, understand one thing clearly. The people who stayed were chosen and not to live.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. This place was never on the map. The road ended without ceremony. One moment the van was climbing a narrow mountain pass, tires crunching over old gravel and frozen mud, and the next, the road simply stopped. No warning sign, no fallen tree, just a thinning strip of earth that dissolved into untouched snow and pine needles, as if the mountain had decided that human paths were no longer welcome beyond that point. They should not have been able to get here. That thought surfaced quietly, without panic, the way an inconvenient fact does when it's too late to matter. The lodge stood another 100 yards ahead, half buried in snow, its dark timber walls blending almost perfectly with the surrounding forest. It wasn't large, but it felt heavy, anchored to the ground in a way that suggested permanence, like it had been waiting longer than any of them could measure. No birds circled overhead. No wind stirred the trees. The group noticed these things in fragments, the way people do when their minds are already congratulating themselves for surviving the journey. They laughed about the road, about how GPS had given up nearly an hour ago. Phones showed blank maps and spinning icons, but no one panicked. There was comfort in the idea that they were unreachable. Isolation felt like protection. Isolation always does. At first. Inside the lodge, the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, dry and stale, but not unpleasant. A fire had already been laid in the stone hearth, though none of them remembered seeing anyone else's tracks outside. Someone joked that the place came prepped for them. Someone else laughed a little too loudly. Windows lined the main room, tall and narrow, their glass slightly warped. When one of them glanced outside, the forest seemed closer than it should have been. The trees pressed inward at odd angles, trunks leaning in subtle defiance of gravity. When she looked again, everything appeared normal. She said nothing. Time behaved strangely from the start. Watches worked, phones ticked forward, but the light outside the windows didn't change the way it should have. Afternoon stretched longer than expected. Shadows pooled in corners, but refused to deepen. When someone remarked that it felt like evening should have arrived by now, the comment passed without response. They unpacked, they explored, they settled in. They should not have been able to get here. The phrase surfaced again later, quietly repeating itself, as if the lodge itself were learning to think through them. Upstairs, the hallway bent just slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough that the far door never quite stayed in view when you stared at it. Rooms were labeled with small brass numbers, their edges worn smooth. One door creaked when opened, another didn't make a sound at all. A third stuck for a moment before opening easily, as though it had decided to allow entry. In one of the rooms, a man paused mid-step, frowning. The air felt heavier there, not colder, just denser. He stepped back into the hallway and felt the pressure lift instantly. He laughed it off, muttering something about altitude sickness. No one suggested leaving. Outside, snow began to fall, not gently, but deliberately. Thick flakes descended in straight lines, unbothered by wind. They piled quickly, swallowing footprints within minutes. When someone opened the front door to watch, the sound of the lodge interior cut off abruptly, as if the outside world absorbed noise instead of carrying it away. The forest did not respond. No animals moved. No distant calls echoed. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was attentive. That night, dinner felt oddly formal. They sat closer than necessary, voices lower than usual. Conversations drifted, stalled, restarted. Every so often, someone would glance toward the windows, as if expecting to see movement just beyond the glass. They didn't. After the meal, someone discovered the paper. It lay on the long table near the fireplace, a single sheet, yellowed and folded neatly in half. No one remembered placing it there. The handwriting was careful, almost polite. They laughed when they read it. Of course they did. Rules always seem funny before they matter. Someone folded the paper and set it aside, joking about creepy cabin traditions. Someone else suggested it was part of the lodge's charm. The fire crackled softly, flames reflecting in the dark windows like watching eyes. Later, as the group drifted off to their rooms, no one noticed the way the paper unfolded itself again. No one noticed the faint sound of wood settling, not from age, but from adjustment. And no one, not yet, realized that the lodge wasn't lost in the mountains. It was exactly where it was supposed to be. As the lights went out one by one, a single thought moved through the building, quiet and patient, repeating itself until it found a place to rest. They should not have been able to get here.
Chapter 2. Chapter 2. The first rule appeared before the snow. Morning arrived without sunrise. The lodge brightened, yes, but not because light poured in from outside. It was as if the interior decided it was time to be seen. Shadows loosened their grip reluctantly, sliding off walls and corners in thin sheets, leaving behind a colorless gray that felt unfinished. Someone checked their watch. Someone else yawned. No one questioned why the windows still showed the same dim, overcast sky they had gone to sleep under. Breakfast unfolded in pieces. A kettle boiled too quietly. Bread tasted faintly of wood smoke. Conversation returned in cautious threads, as if everyone had agreed, without saying so, to keep their voices low until the building woke fully. That was when they noticed the paper again. It sat at the center of the long table, unfolded now, smoothed flat as if carefully prepared for reading. The handwriting hadn't changed. Thin strokes, precise spacing, not hurried, not playful. It hadn't been there when they went to bed. Everyone agreed on that. A woman picked it up first, smiling in the brittle way people do when they don't want to be the one who sounds afraid. She cleared her throat and read aloud. Just one rule. Simple, almost polite. Laughter followed, short, relieved bursts that bounced off the wooden ceiling. Someone joked about horror movies. Someone else mimicked a dramatic voice, warning them not to break the sacred lodge law. The paper passed from hand to hand. The joke held. The rule didn't ask for much. It didn't threaten. It didn't explain consequences. It was the kind of instruction you'd expect at a remote retreat. Reasonable, practical, sensible.
And so they followed it. Of course they did. They followed it without discussion, without resistance. One person even remarked that it made sense, said it out loud, nodding, as if logic had just asserted itself, and won. "It hasn't hurt anyone yet." That phrase surfaced later, casually, after the rule had already been obeyed twice. Outside, snow began to fall. Not thickly, not yet. Just enough to be noticed drifting past the windows in slow, lazy arcs. Someone commented on the timing. Someone else said it was lucky they'd arrived before the weather turned. No one remembered hearing wind. Hours passed, though the day never fully committed to moving forward. Time stretched thin, elastic. Activities filled the gaps: a card game, reading by the fire, quiet pacing from room to room. The lodge felt calmer now, settled, as if the rule had satisfied something unseen. In the afternoon, someone tried to move the paper, not out of fear, out of annoyance. He folded it once, then again, intending to tuck it into a drawer. The paper resisted, not violently, but insistently. It refused to crease properly, edges slipping back into place. When he pressed harder, the fibers felt warm beneath his fingers. He laughed it off, joked about humidity, unfolded it again. The paper lay flat, perfect. Later, another person tried to burn it. The flame caught the corner easily enough, curling it black, eating inward. For a moment, there was relief. Then the fire went out. Not smoldered, not faded. Gone. The paper remained untouched, its edges crisp, the handwriting unchanged. That was the first moment the laughter stopped too quickly. But still, no one panicked. It hasn't hurt anyone yet. That phrase became a kind of salve, applied whenever discomfort threatened to grow teeth. The rule was followed again and again. Each time it felt easier, less like obedience, more like routine. The lodge responded subtly. The air warmed, the fireplace caught faster. A door that had stuck the night before opened smoothly now. Someone remarked, half joking, that the place seemed happier. Outside, the snowfall thickened. By evening, the forest was gone, swallowed behind a white curtain. The windows no longer reflected trees, only pale emptiness. The sense of isolation sharpened, but with it came something else: order. Dinner was quieter but calmer. The rule was mentioned openly now, referred to with familiarity. Someone suggested writing it down somewhere more permanent. Another suggested there might be more rules. No one said they didn't want that. Upstairs, the hallway felt straighter than before, doors aligned properly. The pressure in the odd room was gone. The lodge, it seemed, was adjusting. That night, as lights were turned off one by one, the paper remained on the table exactly where it had been all day, watching, waiting. No one noticed when a second line appeared beneath the first. Not yet. As the snow pressed closer to the windows, thick and soundless, the lodge settled deeper into the mountain, satisfied for now. The rule had been accepted, the system established, and somewhere in the quiet, a thought took root, comforting in its simplicity, dangerous in its certainty. It hasn't hurt anyone yet.
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. The Storm That Cut Us Off. The storm announced itself without sound. No rising wind, no distant thunder, no gradual shift in temperature. One moment the world outside the lodge was a dull, colorless gray, and the next the windows filled with white, as if the mountain had exhaled and never inhaled again. Snow slammed against the glass in thick, heavy sheets, moving sideways, upward, sometimes circling back on itself. It did not behave like weather. It behaved like resistance.
Someone stood abruptly from the table, chair legs scraping too loudly across the floor. He crossed to the window and pressed his forehead to the glass, squinting. The forest was gone now, not hidden, not blurred, but erased. Where trees should have been, there was only motion, endless, churning white. "That came out of nowhere," he said. No one disagreed. Within minutes, the lodge began to creak, not from cold, but from pressure. Snow piled faster than gravity should have allowed, climbing the walls, swallowing the lower panes of glass. The front door shuddered once, twice, as if something outside had leaned against it and reconsidered. Phones came out then, reflexively, comfortingly. No signal. That, too, was laughed off at first. Remote lodge, mountains, expected behavior. Someone tried again, lifting their phone higher, walking toward a window as if altitude inside the room might help. Nothing. Another person tried the landline mounted near the kitchen wall. The receiver was warm when they lifted it, oddly so, but there was no dial tone, just a soft, steady hiss, like distant breath. Generators kicked on automatically, lights holding steady. The lodge seemed prepared, pleased. When someone suggested they check the road, there was a moment, a pause just long enough to register, then pass. Of course they should check. It was practical, sensible. They bundled up quickly, movements brisk, energized by purpose. Fear thrives in stillness. Action feels like immunity. The front door resisted when they opened it. Not locked, not stuck. It simply pushed back, heavy as if buried under something solid. Snow forced its way inside in sharp gusts, stinging exposed skin, biting hard. Visibility dropped to nothing beyond the threshold. The road was gone. Not covered, gone. Where gravel and mud should have been was an unbroken slope of snow, smooth and steep, leading directly into white chaos. No landmarks, no edges, no direction. Someone took a step forward anyway. The cold hit instantly, violently, searing lungs, numbing fingers within seconds. He staggered, disoriented, spun in place once before another hand grabbed his coat and hauled him back inside. The door slammed shut. The sound was final. Inside, breath came hard and fast. Snow melted into dark patches on the floor. No one spoke for several seconds. Then someone said it, quietly, like a reassurance learned from repetition. "It's just a storm." Outside, something shifted. The snow moved, not blown, not falling, but sliding laterally, thickening near the door, thinning near the windows. The storm seemed to respond to where they stood, where they watched. Hours passed. The lodge held. The blizzard did not relent. It did not ebb or flow. It did not tire. It simply continued, pressing closer, piling higher, sealing every visible exit. Windows dimmed as snow climbed past them, turning daylight into a pale, suffocating glow. Phones were tried again. Nothing. Someone attempted to send a message, any message. It showed as pending, spinning endlessly, until the moment they turned away from the door. Then, inexplicably, the phone buzzed. Message failed. Only when we tried to leave. The phrase arrived unbidden, settling into the group's shared vocabulary as if it had always been there. It was repeated once, then again, each time with more certainty. They tested it. A phone placed on the table connected briefly, one bar, then two. The same phone lifted and aimed toward the front door, dropped instantly to nothing. Someone laughed, sharp and nervous, calling it coincidence. No one moved the phone closer again. As night should have fallen, though the light outside barely changed, the storm intensified. Snow hammered the roof now, a steady, deliberate rhythm. The lodge groaned, beams flexing, wood popping like knuckles under pressure. Inside, the air felt tighter, warmer, almost humid. Dinner was abandoned half-prepared, hunger dulled under tension. People gathered near the fire, sitting closer than before. Someone joked about being snowed in for a few days. Someone else mentioned supplies. They had enough, for now.
The rule from the paper was followed without discussion. No one framed it as obedience, it was simply prudent. The storm outside made everything else feel reckless by comparison. The lodge seemed to approve. The fire burned brighter. The hiss on the dead phone line faded to silence. Even the storm's sound softened slightly, as if satisfied by their stillness. That was the moment of relief. It did not last. Some time later, no one could say how long, someone stood at a window and frowned. The snow there was thinner, not melted, not clearing, just less. A shape pressed briefly against the glass from the outside. Not a figure, not a face, an absence, a space where the storm bent inward as if something solid occupied it. The shape withdrew slowly, deliberately. No one spoke. The storm continued to rage, but now it felt intentional, contained, like a wall rather than a force of nature. And as the lodge settled deeper into isolation, one truth became unavoidable, threading itself through every silent thought. The storm wasn't keeping them safe. It was keeping them in.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. They disappeared while we slept. Sleep came reluctantly. Not because of fear, at least not openly, but because the lodge felt too aware of them now. The storm outside continued its endless pressure, a constant muffled roar like breath held too long. Inside, the fire burned low, embers pulsing softly, casting shadows that stretched and recoiled with every shift of light. Eventually, exhaustion won. Doors were closed, lights clicked off one by one, footsteps faded into the upper hallway. The rule was followed carefully, almost reverently, as if it were a bedtime ritual instead of an instruction. That was when the lodge grew very quiet. Hours passed, though outside the night stayed the same. The disappearance did not announce itself. No scream tore through the dark, no thud, no struggle, no sound at all. The lodge did not creak. The storm did not change. Nothing woke the others. When morning, or something close to it, finally arrived, the first sign was absence. A woman stepped into the hallway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, already forming a comment about the strange light outside. Her words died halfway to her mouth when she noticed the door at the end of the hall standing open. It had been closed the night before. She was certain of that. She called a name once, then again, louder. No answer. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, or nearly so. The blanket lay folded back slightly, as if someone had just stood up. The sheets were warm. Personal items remained untouched. A jacket hung over the chair. Boots sat neatly by the wall. A phone rested on the bedside table, dark and silent. The person who belonged to them was simply gone. Panic tried to rise. It was sharp, instinctive, but it didn't take hold, not fully. Someone suggested they might be in the bathroom. Another checked the kitchen. A third searched outside the door, peering through the glass into the endless white, calling the name again. Nothing answered. They searched the lodge methodically, room by room, voices tight but controlled. The building offered no resistance, no hidden corners, no locked doors. There was nowhere for a person to be, and yet someone was missing. The phrase surfaced without anyone claiming ownership of it. They must have gone outside. It was said softly, carefully, like a bridge laid over open space. But the front door showed no sign of disturbance. Snow had piled against it uniformly overnight, smooth and untouched. No footprints, no drag marks, nothing leading away. The storm had not allowed passage. The realization settled slowly, like frost creeping across glass. They disappeared while we slept. No one said it aloud at first. They didn't need to. It passed between them in glances, in the way hands lingered on doorframes, in the way voices dropped. Someone laughed, short, brittle, and suggested it was a prank, that they'd hidden somewhere, that they were waiting for the right moment to jump out. No one laughed back. The rule was mentioned then, tentatively, respectfully. Had it been followed? Yes, everyone agreed it had. They replayed the night aloud, reconstructing routines, movements, compliance. The rule had been obeyed exactly. Relief flickered. If the rule had been followed, then this couldn't be punishment. It must be something else. They repeated the phrase again, clinging to it more tightly now. It hasn't hurt anyone yet. The lodge, for its part, remained cooperative. The fire reignited easily, water ran hot, doors opened smoothly. The storm outside maintained its steady pressure, but did not worsen. It was easy, dangerously easy, to believe the disappearance was an anomaly. Someone suggested writing the name down. Someone else suggested not doing that, as if recording it might make the absence more real. They compromised by saying it out loud once, quietly, and then never again. The day passed in uneasy stillness. No one strayed far from the common areas. Conversations circled the same points, never landing. Every so often, someone would glance toward the staircase, expecting footsteps that never came. As evening crept in, though the light outside barely changed, they noticed the paper again. It lay on the table, exactly where it had been before. The handwriting was unchanged, but there was space now beneath the first rule. Room enough for more. No one touched it. Dinner was eaten quickly, without appetite. The empty chair at the table remained empty. No one suggested moving it. The absence had weight now, pressing down on the group, shaping how they sat, how they breathed. As night came again, fear finally broke through the careful logic. Doors were locked, lights were left on longer than necessary. People lingered in the hallway, reluctant to be alone. Someone joked about sleeping in shifts. The rule was followed again. Of course it was. Beds were checked twice, conversations whispered through cracked doors, fading only when exhaustion forced silence. The lodge listened. As sleep took them, uneven, shallow, reluctant, the storm outside pressed closer, snow climbing higher against the walls, sealing windows completely. The world beyond ceased to exist. Inside, the lodge adjusted. Somewhere between breaths, something moved, not with urgency, not with force, but with certainty. A presence passed through a room without opening the door. The bed did not creak. The air barely stirred. In the morning, another room would be empty, another bed warm, another life removed so cleanly it would feel, impossibly, as if they had never been there at all. And the worst part, the truth none of them were ready to face, was this. The lodge was not taking them at random. It was watching, and it was learning who would stay quiet enough to be chosen next.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Following the rules made it worse. By the third morning, obedience had become a habit, not a choice, an instinct, the kind that settles into muscle memory, where hands move before thought catches up. The lodge had taught them that much already. It had taught them that order felt safer than questions. Another name went unspoken at breakfast. Another chair stayed empty.
No one searched this time. They already knew what they would or wouldn't find. The paper waited on the table, patient as ever. Overnight, new lines had appeared beneath the first rule. The handwriting remained calm, almost gentle, as if aware that panic would only complicate things. The new rules asked for very little, at first. One required distance between rooms, between people. Another asked for quiet during certain hours. A third suggested separation for safety. None of them explained why. None of them needed to. The logic filled itself in. If someone disappeared while sleeping, then fewer people in one place meant less risk. If noise drew attention, silence would provide cover. If proximity invited danger, isolation would keep it away. They discussed each rule carefully, voices low, reasonable, cooperative. Fear disguised itself as practicality. Someone even smiled, relieved to have guidance again. The lodge rewarded them. The storm outside softened slightly, its roar dimming to a steady hush. The lights stopped flickering. Doors no longer stuck. Even the air felt easier to breathe. It was working. They followed the rules exactly. They separated into assigned rooms. They stopped wandering. They spoke only when permitted, whispering when necessary. Meals were eaten alone, plates left neatly by doors like offerings. The phrase returned, stronger now, reinforced by evidence. They did everything right. It was said after the next disappearance. The woman had been meticulous. She followed every rule without question. She reminded others gently when voices rose too high, when someone lingered too long in a hallway. She volunteered for isolation when the rules suggested it, smiling tightly as she closed her door. Her room was the cleanest. Her bed was warm. Her belongings were arranged with almost ritual precision, as if she had stepped away mid-task and never come back. They did everything right. This time the words didn't reassure. They unsettled. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Those who bent the rules, accidentally, casually, remained. Those who adhered with devotion vanished. A man who forgot the silence rule one evening, laughing too loudly at nothing, survived the night. A woman who crossed into the wrong hallway and apologized profusely was still there in the morning. The ones who followed perfectly were not. Suspicion bloomed quietly, like mold in the walls. But the rules kept coming. They demanded more now, longer isolation, no eye contact during certain hours, sleeping positions carefully described. One rule insisted on choosing someone to remain alone overnight for balance. No one wanted to volunteer. No one wanted to refuse. The lodge waited. Eventually, someone agreed. He reasoned aloud, voice shaking but determined. Someone had to do it. It was better to choose than let the rules choose for them. He did everything right. They checked on him from the hallway before sleeping. He smiled, thin and tired, insisting he was fine. He thanked them for trusting the process. In the morning, his room was empty. No warmth left in the bed this time, no impression on the pillow, just cold sheets and a faint indentation in the mattress, already fading. That's when panic finally broke through. Not loud panic, not screaming or running. The worst kind. Quiet realization. The rules weren't protecting them. They were sorting them. The lodge wasn't reacting to fear. It was cultivating it, refining it, rewarding those who offered themselves most completely. The paper changed again. The handwriting grew denser, more specific. The rules overlapped now, contradicting each other in subtle ways. Following one meant violating another. Obedience became a maze with no exit. Arguments erupted in whispers. Accusations followed. Someone suggested tearing the paper apart. Someone else begged them not to. The lodge responded instantly. The storm surged, slamming against the walls with renewed force. Lights dimmed. The temperature dropped sharply in the hallway. The message was clear. They stopped arguing. Compliance resumed, not because they believed in it, but because defiance felt immediately punished. The lodge had learned how to correct behavior. And still, the disappearances continued. Faster now. The most careful went first, the quietest, the ones who waited patiently, who trusted instructions, who believed survival came from doing things the right way. They did everything right. The phrase lost all meaning. It became an epitaph. By nightfall, the group was smaller. The lodge felt larger, rooms stretching, hallways lengthening as if absorbing what had been removed. The air smelled faintly of dust and something else, old, dry, expectant. The narrator stood alone in a doorway, listening to the storm, to the lodge, to the soft creak of wood adjusting around them. For the first time, a dangerous thought formed, clear, undeniable, terrifying in its simplicity. What if the rules weren't tests to pass? What if they were traps to fall into? The paper lay on the table, covered now with careful instructions, every line an invitation to disappear. And somewhere in the walls, something waited, patient, precise, ready for the next person who proved they could obey. The chapter ended not with a scream, not with a struggle, but with a choice looming closer than ever. Follow the rules and vanish quietly, or stop playing entirely and risk what happens next.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. The Lodge was watching our choices. The realization did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, threaded through exhaustion and fear, hiding behind logic until logic itself began to rot. The Lodge did not take people at random. That much was undeniable now. Randomness would have been kinder. The disappearances followed patterns, not schedules, not locations, behavior. The narrator noticed it first in the pauses, the moments just before someone spoke or didn't, the way the lodge seemed to listen when voices dropped, the way floorboards tightened when someone hesitated in a doorway, deciding whether to turn back or step forward. Fear was not punished. Fear was measured. Compliance was not rewarded. Compliance was cataloged. Those who froze at decisions vanished faster than those who acted rashly. Those who asked permission, silent or spoken, were removed more cleanly than those who broke rules accidentally. The lodge reacted not to what they did, but how they decided to do it. The paper was still there. It had not grown longer overnight, but it had grown more precise. Subtle changes appeared in the wording. Verbs shifted, conditions added, exceptions quietly removed. The rules were no longer instructions, they were variables. Someone followed a rule too slowly. Gone. Someone followed a rule too eagerly. Gone. Someone paused, conflicted, standing at the edge of compliance. The lights flickered, the walls creaked, but they remained. The lodge was watching the space between choice and action. A man tested it without meaning to. He stood in the hallway late that evening, holding the paper, lips moving as he reread a rule that contradicted another. His brow furrowed. He looked toward the stairs, then toward the kitchen. His foot lifted, hovered, set down again. Nothing happened. The narrator watched from across the room, heart pounding, breath shallow. The man laughed nervously and stepped back, folding the paper. He survived the night. Not because he followed the rules,
but because he hesitated. That was the moment the thought took shape, sharp and terrible and impossible to ignore. It didn't want obedience, it wanted selection. The lodge was not enforcing order, it was filtering people based on how they responded to authority, to fear, to uncertainty. The rules were not meant to be followed correctly, they were meant to provoke decisions. And the lodge was deciding who was worth keeping. The storm outside responded to this understanding. Not violently, subtly. When fear spiked, the wind howled louder. When silence fell too heavy, the storm softened, almost coaxing. Snow pressed closer to windows when someone lingered too long near them, as if discouraging escape without forbidding it. The lodge mirrored them. A woman tried to rebel openly. She tore the paper in half. For a moment, just a moment, nothing happened. Relief surged, bright and intoxicating. She laughed, breathless, triumphant. Then the pieces slid back together in her hands. Not stitched, not glued, aligned. The sound that followed was not loud. A deep, resonant settling moved through the lodge, like a massive weight shifting underground. The temperature dropped sharply in the room. Frost crept along the edges of the windows, spelling nothing, forming no shapes, just claiming space. The woman backed away, shaking. She survived the night. Not because she followed the rules, but because the man who quietly smoothed the paper afterward did not. The lodge did not punish defiance, it punished submission. This inversion broke something fundamental in them. Survival instincts faltered when the rules of survival reversed. People became unpredictable, not because they wanted to be brave, but because certainty had become lethal. Conversations fractured into fragments. Eye contact became dangerous. Too much confidence felt like a declaration. Too little felt like surrender. The lodge thrived on this imbalance. Rooms shifted subtly now. Hallways felt longer when someone hesitated, shorter when someone rushed. Doors opened more easily for those who acted without asking. Stairs creaked louder beneath careful steps. The lodge was shaping outcomes. The narrator began to move differently, less cautiously, less politely. They stopped waiting for instructions, stopped seeking permission. When a rule appeared that required stillness, they paced. When silence was demanded, they hummed softly under their breath. The lodge noticed. Not with anger, with interest. That night, the paper changed again. One rule vanished entirely. No explanation, no replacement. The absence was louder than any instruction. Whoever had followed that rule most faithfully was gone by morning. The pattern solidified into something undeniable. This was not a test of morality. It was not a test of intelligence. It was a test of response. The lodge selected those who could act under pressure without dissolving into obedience, those who resisted the comfort of being told what to do, those who broke symmetry. Outside, the storm pressed on, unwavering. Inside, the air felt faintly metallic now, like old blood dried long ago. The lodge felt fuller, expanded by subtraction. The narrator stood alone near the fireplace, listening to the structure breathe, feeling its attention settle like a hand on the back of their neck.
They understood now why the people who stayed went missing. They stayed still. They stayed compliant. They stayed waiting for permission to survive. The lodge did not want followers. It wanted deciders. And as another rule began to write itself slowly onto the paper, ink appearing stroke by stroke, the narrator felt something close to certainty for the first time since arriving. The next chapter would not be about obeying or disobeying. It would be about choosing to break the system entirely and finding out whether the lodge would allow that.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. The Night Reality Folded Inward. The lodge broke its own shape that night. It began subtly, so subtly that no one trusted themselves to name it at first. A hallway felt longer than it should have. A door appeared one step farther to the left than memory allowed. The kind of discrepancy the mind tries to smooth over because the alternative requires admitting that space itself has learned to lie. The narrator noticed it when walking from the common room to the stairs. It should have taken 12 steps. It took 17. They stopped midway, heart thudding, breath loud in their ears. The walls on either side looked the same, dark wood, shallow grooves worn smooth by hands that had passed long before, but the distance between landmarks no longer matched. When they turned back, the common room felt farther away too. The lodge had stretched, not expanded, folded. Doors began opening into places they should not have led. A bedroom door opened onto the kitchen. The kitchen door opened onto the upstairs hallway. One narrow door revealed a staircase that descended far deeper than the lodge's foundations could allow, steps spiraling down into blackness that swallowed sound. No one went down. They stood at thresholds, staring, trying not to show how badly their hands were shaking. When a door was closed and reopened, it sometimes corrected itself. Other times it didn't. Reality had become conditional. Time fractured next. A watch ticked forward 3 minutes while a candle burned down nearly an inch. Someone blinked and missed an entire conversation. Another person spoke a sentence that echoed back seconds later, delayed, warped, as if the lodge had decided to repeat it. Outside, the storm no longer moved. Snow hung suspended against the windows, flakes frozen mid-fall like insects in amber. The pressure remained, but the motion was gone. The world beyond the lodge had stopped progressing. Inside, everything accelerated. The rules began rewriting themselves openly now. The paper no longer waited for night. Ink bled into existence in real time, lines forming slowly, deliberately, as if composed in response to what the occupants were doing at that exact moment. Someone stepped backward, a rule forbidding retreat. Someone raised their voice, a rule cautioned against noise. Someone laughed hysterically, the sound sharp and broken. The rule vanished. The lodge was adapting faster than they could. Physical escape became impossible, not because exits were blocked, but because they no longer connected to anything consistent. The front door opened once to blinding white, another time to a wall of solid wood, once briefly to the same hallway they were already standing in. The lodge had folded inward, feeding on its own geometry. Panic spiked, hot, breathless, animal, but the lodge reacted instantly. Lights dimmed, the floor tilted just enough to throw balance off. A deep groan rolled through the structure, not from stress, but from satisfaction. Fear was no longer just measured, it was rewarded.
The narrator moved through the shifting space with growing clarity. The realization from before held true here as well. Hesitation was survival. Certainty was death. They walked without destination, letting instinct guide steps instead of intention. When a hallway looped back on itself, they didn't turn around. They sat down. When a door opened into darkness, they closed it gently and leaned against it, listening. The lodge paused. It didn't like being ignored. Somewhere nearby, someone screamed. The sound cut off abruptly, not fading, not echoing. One instant present, the next erased. Silence rushed in to fill the space, thick and oppressive. No one ran toward it. They had learned better. Rooms began to compress. Walls felt closer, ceilings lower. The air smelled wrong now, stale, mineral, like breath trapped too long in stone. The lodge was consolidating, pulling remaining occupants inward, reducing variance. Selection required narrowing. The narrator passed a mirror and did not recognize their own reflection immediately. It lagged by half a second, eyes tracking movement after the body had already stilled. When they raised a hand, the reflection hesitated, just slightly, before copying. They smiled. The reflection did not. The paper lay on the floor now, discarded, covered in overlapping rules, some crossed out, some rewritten, some contradicting each other entirely. It had become unusable as guidance. That, the narrator realized, was the point. The lodge no longer needed rules. It had learned enough. The storm outside pressed closer again, snow grinding against walls like teeth. The suspended flakes resumed movement, but backward now, rising instead of falling. Time had lost its direction. A door slammed somewhere deep within the structure, followed by a sound like wood splitting. But when they reached the source, nothing was broken. The lodge was not collapsing. It was rearranging. The narrator found themselves back in the common room without remembering how they got there. The fire burned low, light flickering strangely, shadows moving independent of flame. They stood still. The lodge reacted by doing nothing. No creaking, no shifting, no new rules. Stillness, unprompted, unrequested, confused it. For the first time, the narrator felt something like control, not power, not safety, but leverage. The lodge had prepared for fear, obedience, rebellion. It had not prepared for refusal to engage. Around them, space continued to fold, doors opening and closing on their own, hallways breathing, the structure alive with decision-making. But the narrator remained where they were, waiting without expectation. Somewhere nearby, something large and unseen moved, then stopped. The lodge had reached the limits of adaptation, and as the walls settled into a tense, unnatural quiet, the narrator understood the final terrible truth of the night. Reality hadn't broken. It had bent, just far enough to reveal what happened when a system designed to control humans encountered someone who stopped playing entirely. The lodge waited. So did the narrator. And between them, something was about to give.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. I broke the only rule that mattered. The rule was simple. It had always been simple. Stay where you are told. Move only when instructed. Do not act without permission. It was never written that way, not exactly, but it lived beneath every other instruction, shaping them, binding them together. It was the rule that made all the others possible. And it was the one the narrator broke. Not with resolve, not with bravery, but because there was nothing left to lose. The lodge had gone quiet again, the dangerous kind of quiet that felt deliberate rather than calm. Hallways no longer shifted. Doors no longer rearranged themselves. The building seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The narrator stood alone near the staircase that no longer led anywhere consistent. Above them, the upper floor creaked softly, adjusting its weight. Below, the lower level exhaled a cold, mineral-scented breath. The paper lay discarded somewhere behind them, irrelevant now. No rules appeared. That absence pressed harder than any instruction ever had. The narrator felt it then, not fear exactly, but pressure. A subtle push toward stillness, toward waiting, toward compliance disguised as patience. That was the trap. They stepped forward. Not toward an exit, not toward safety, just forward, without reason, without checking, without looking for permission. The sensation was immediate. The lodge reacted, not violently, not angrily, but with hesitation. The floorboards beneath the narrator's feet tightened, then loosened again, as if uncertain whether to creak. The lights flickered once and steadied. Somewhere deep in the structure, something shifted and then stopped. It didn't expect defiance. The narrator took another step. The air grew heavier, dense with attention. Walls leaned inward slightly, not threatening, just curious. The lodge was recalculating. They laughed then, not loudly, not hysterically. A short, breathless sound that escaped before it could be stopped. The sound echoed strangely, bending back on itself, as if the lodge were trying to decide whether laughter counted as fear. It didn't. The narrator moved again, this time sideways, into a hallway that previously looped endlessly back into the common room. The corridor stretched ahead, straight and narrow, the end clearly visible. For the first time in hours, space behaved. With each unprompted movement, the lodge's responses grew slower, less precise. The structure had been built to react to fear, to obedience, to rebellion within expected parameters. Randomness unsettled it. The narrator stopped abruptly, then turned back without explanation. The hallway behind them shortened, compressing with a soft groan. The door they had passed moments earlier vanished entirely, replaced by smooth, uninterrupted wall. The lodge was no longer controlling the environment. It was chasing decisions. The narrator sat down in the middle of the floor. That, more than anything else, seemed to alarm it. The temperature dropped sharply. A low vibration moved through the walls, deep enough to be felt in the bones. The storm outside surged again, snow grinding violently against the structure. But still, no disappearance, no punishment. The narrator stood and walked toward the sound, toward pressure instead of away from it. They opened doors without hesitation, closed others without looking inside, moved against every instinct trained into them since childhood. Do not wait, do not ask, do not comply. The structure struggled. Rules tried to form, ink bleeding into existence on walls now, not paper, but they smeared and faded before they could finish writing. Instructions contradicted themselves mid-sentence, collapsing into meaningless scrawls. The system required predictability. The narrator provided none. Somewhere nearby, something large moved again, closer this time. The presence that had taken others so cleanly now felt uncertain. It hovered at the edge of perception, unable to finalize a decision. Predators hesitate when prey behaves incorrectly. The narrator reached the front door. It should not have opened. It had never opened consistently before. It had led to snow, to walls, to impossible repetitions of interior space. The narrator opened it anyway. Beyond the threshold was not freedom, not yet, but it was different. The storm paused at the doorway, snowflakes hanging in midair, trembling. The white beyond felt thin, stretched, like fabric worn close to tearing. The narrator stepped halfway through, then stopped, foot suspended between inside and out. The lodge reacted sharply this time. A deep, resonant sound rolled through the structure, not anger, not pain, but confusion. The walls flexed inward, then outward, like lungs struggling to remember how to breathe. The narrator stepped back inside, then closed the door. That was when they understood. Escape wasn't the goal. Disruption was. The lodge had been built, grown, shaped, learned to select those who could be controlled, filtered, categorized. It thrived on expectation, on patterns. Unpredictability wasn't just resistance, it was poison. The narrator leaned against the door, breathing hard, heart racing, not from fear, but from exhilaration. The lodge had revealed its weakness not through force, but through hesitation. It didn't expect defiance. Not true defiance, the kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't posture, doesn't seek victory. The kind that simply refuses to behave correctly. Around them, the structure settled into an uneasy stillness. No new rules appeared. No rooms shifted. The storm outside receded slightly, its pressure easing for the first time since arrival. The narrator was still inside the lodge, but they were no longer contained by it. As they pushed off the door and moved deeper into the building, changing direction twice without reason, stopping mid-step, humming softly under their breath, the lodge followed their movements not with authority, but with uncertainty. The balance had shifted, and somewhere in that shifting space, between control and chaos, the narrator sensed the beginning of an ending. Not an escape, a collapse. One wrong choice by the lodge itself was all that remained.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 9. Everyone who stayed was taken. The end did not come like a climax. It came like a process. Once the lodge understood it was losing control, it stopped pretending otherwise. Subtlety vanished. Precision replaced patience. The disappearances accelerated, not with violence, not with spectacle, but with efficiency. People were removed the way errors are corrected. One moment they were present, the next they were not. Those who waited were taken first. A man sat on the edge of his bed, hands folded, breathing carefully, eyes fixed on the door. He had decided that stillness was safety, that if he made himself small enough, quiet enough, the lodge would overlook him. In the morning, his room was empty. The bed was cold this time, the chair neatly pushed in, the air scrubbed clean of him. Those who hid went next. They tucked themselves into corners of rooms that had not yet shifted, behind doors they believed the lodge had forgotten. They held their breath when the walls creaked, when the storm pressed closer, when the rules flickered briefly into existence on nearby surfaces. Hiding felt active, it felt like choice. It was not. They vanished between moments, between heartbeats, leaving behind impressions in dust where bodies had been, quickly smoothed away by the lodge itself. Those who followed instructions were last. They clung to the paper even after it became useless, even after rules contradicted themselves, even after obedience had proven lethal again and again. They believed, desperately, that if they just followed the final version correctly, the system would recognize their effort. They did everything right. The lodge rewarded that consistency by removing them cleanly. No resistance, no hesitation, no sound. The pattern completed itself. The narrator moved through the lodge as the numbers dwindled, not hiding, not waiting, not complying. They did not announce rebellion either, they simply refused to engage. When a rule appeared demanding silence, they whispered nonsense. When isolation was instructed, they stood in doorways. When movement was discouraged, they paced.
The lodge reacted, but poorly now, responses lagging, spaces misaligning, doors opening late or not at all. The system had been designed to refine, not to chase chaos. Disappearances overlapped. 2 rooms emptied at once, then 3. The lodge no longer curated its selections carefully. It was closing the loop. Hours passed, though outside the night stayed the same. The storm outside had grown thinner, its pressure inconsistent, as if its boundary it maintained were weakening. Snow slid down the walls in slow sheets, revealing glimpses of dark forest beyond. Trees bent inward, watching. The narrator passed the long table in the common room. The paper was gone. Not torn, not burned. Gone. Rules were no longer necessary. The lodge had learned all it could from those willing to be categorized. A sound echoed from the upper floor, a soft, rhythmic knock, almost polite. The narrator ignored it. When they walked away, the knocking followed them, shifting through walls, never closer, never farther. Attention without authority. The final disappearances happened quickly after that. A woman froze in the hallway, waiting for instruction that never came. Gone. A man pressed himself into a corner, eyes closed, whispering the rules under his breath like a prayer. Gone. The lodge did not savor these moments, it processed them. By the time the narrator realized they were alone, the building felt lighter. Rooms expanded slightly, hallways shortened, the air warmed just enough to notice. The lodge had finished selecting. The narrator stood in the center of the common room, listening to the structure settle, listening to the storm thin further outside. No rules appeared, no doors shifted, no presence hovered nearby. Indifference replaced control. That was the final clue. The lodge was not interested in those who did not participate. The narrator walked to the front door, not urgently, not cautiously. They opened it without expectation. This time, the door opened cleanly. The storm parted like a curtain, snow falling normally now, gravity reasserting itself. The forest beyond looked wrong still, too close, too quiet, but it was there, solid, continuous. The narrator stepped outside. The lodge did not stop them. They did not look back. Behind them, the door closed softly on its own. No roar, no collapse, no protest. The lodge did not need to punish escape. It had already succeeded. The narrator walked into the forest, snow crunching beneath their boots, breath fogging the air. The cold felt real again, biting, honest. With each step away, the pressure eased. Hours later, when dawn finally broke properly, pink and fragile over the mountains, the lodge was no longer visible. Not hidden, gone. Search teams would come later. They would find no structure, no road, no sign that a building had ever stood there at all. Only footprints, one set leading away and none leading back. The narrator would tell their story eventually. People would listen, some would believe, most would not. That was fine, because the truth did not need belief to remain dangerous. The lodge would rebuild somewhere else, somewhere isolated, somewhere safe. And when it did, it would wait for the same kinds of people. Those who stayed, those who waited, those who followed instructions. Everyone who stayed was taken. And the only reason the narrator survived, the only reason they were never selected, was because when the system demanded participation, they chose the one thing it could not tolerate. They stopped playing entirely.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. The lodge is still there. Years passed. The world resumed its ordinary cruelty. Traffic, bills, weather that behaved the way weather should. News cycles replaced missing persons flyers. The mountains where the lodge had stood were logged, surveyed, photographed, renamed. Time did what time always does. It sanded terror down into rumor. The survivor returned anyway. Not immediately, not impulsively. The decision arrived slowly, growing heavier with every year that passed without answers. Memory had softened some edges, sharpened others. Dreams still returned to the same details: the pressure in the walls, the patience in the air, the way silence felt evaluative rather than empty. Records were checked first. County maps, property registries, old permits. Nothing matched. No structure had ever been approved in that range. No road had ever been built where the road should have been. Satellite images showed unbroken forest across every relevant year. It was as if the lodge had never existed. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. The survivor hiked alone, following a path that did not appear on any trail guide. The forest felt different now, louder, busier, alive with birds and wind. Sunlight filtered through branches in familiar, reassuring patterns. But the ground still sloped wrong in places, and some trees leaned inward, subtly, deliberately. The air cooled as elevation increased. Snow appeared earlier than expected, thin patches clinging to shadowed ground. The survivor recognized the feeling before the sight, that sense of compression, of space narrowing without visible cause. They stopped, listened. Nothing listened back. And yet, there it was. The lodge did not emerge suddenly. It assembled itself piece by piece, the way memory does when it decides to be believed. A dark line between trees, a roofline interrupting sky, timber walls absorbing light. It stood exactly where it had before, unchanged, no decay, no weathering, no sign of age or abandonment, as if it had been waiting with perfect patience. The survivor did not approach immediately. They circled the perimeter instead, boots crunching softly in snow. No tracks marred the ground, not animal, not human. The place did not interact with the forest around it. It existed alongside it. The front door was closed. No rules were posted. No paper waited inside the window. The lodge felt dormant. The survivor stepped closer, heart steady, breath slow. The building did not react. No creaking, no pressure, no subtle rearrangement of space. It wasn't active. It was ready. Inside, the air smelled exactly as it had before: dry wood, dust, something mineral beneath it all. Furniture stood arranged but unused. The fireplace was cold. The long table was bare. Rooms opened where they should. Hallways behaved. Time passed normally. The survivor moved through the space without hesitation, without deference. They touched walls, opened doors, stood in thresholds without asking permission. Nothing objected. In an upstairs bedroom, they found something new: a guest book. It lay open on a small desk, pages blank except for the first entry. The handwriting was careful, familiar. Not the survivor's. Names filled the page beneath it, dozens of them. Dates spanned decades, all clustered within narrow ranges of weeks, sometimes days. No years repeated exactly. Groups. Cycles. The lodge did not hunt continuously. It waited. The survivor closed the book gently. In the common room, they felt it then, the faintest sensation of pressure returning, like a distant storm remembered rather than heard. Not directed at them, at the idea of someone else. The lodge did not activate for witnesses. It activated for participants. That was the final understanding. The survivor stood in the center of the room and spoke aloud, voice steady, unafraid. It only works if you believe the rules apply to you. The walls did not respond. The lodge did not correct them. The survivor smiled, a small, tired expression, and turned toward the door. As they left, the building remained intact, unchanged, unconcerned. Outside, the forest accepted them back without comment. Later, much later, people would ask why the survivor returned, why they didn't burn the place down, why they didn't try to warn authorities, hikers, anyone who might wander too close. The survivor always answered the same way. You cannot destroy a system that feeds on belief. You cannot warn people who trust rules more than instinct. You cannot save those who want to be told what to do. The lodge would stand until someone arrived who mistook instructions for safety, who mistook obedience for intelligence, who believed survival was earned by doing things correctly. When that happened, the paper would appear again. The rules would begin simply, and the lodge would watch, patient, precise, selecting those who stayed. The survivor never went back after that. They didn't need to, because the lodge wasn't tied to a place. It was tied to a behavior. And wherever people waited for permission to live, wherever they trusted systems that demanded silence, stillness, compliance, the lodge would find them. It always does. And the only reason it ever takes anyone at all is because they believe, just long enough, that the rules apply to them.
Closing chapter. Everyone wants rules when they're afraid. Rules feel like safety, structure, control. But what happened in that lodge taught me something no survival guide ever will. Some systems are designed to eliminate the obedient. The people who stayed believed patience would save them, silence would protect them, compliance would earn mercy. It didn't. The lodge didn't reward good behavior, it filtered it. And if places like that exist, and I know they do, then this matters. Because the next time something tells you to stay put, to wait, to follow instructions without question, you need to ask yourself one thing: who benefits from my obedience? If this story unsettled you, don't ignore that feeling. Share it, subscribe, and remember, survival was never random.